Good morning. I'm Jane Findlay, President of the Landscape Institute, and welcome to this session on the health benefit of green space. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers this morning on this really important subject. The pandemic has highlighted what an important role green space, parks and nature play in all our lives. Before lockdown, many saw these spaces as a luxury, something nice to have but not essential, and perhaps even a frivolous expense. And I think the public now more than ever realise how important these places are for health, nature and well-being. And the pandemic has also highlighted health inequalities experienced by many communities, and it is no coincidence that these are often in neighbourhoods in our towns and cities with poor green space provision. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, I'd like to welcome Valerie Gladwell. Good morning, Valerie. Valerie is the course director for the Sport and Exercise Science degree at the University of Essex. Her main research interests include physical activity and the natural environment, the importance of green spaces for promoting physical activity, behaviour change and workplace well-being. Next, I would like to welcome Luke Engleback. Good morning, Luke.
Hello.
Luke is a chartered landscape architect and eco-urbanist with over 30 years experience of environmental design and planning in the UK and abroad. He's also a member of the LI's Policy and Communications Committee. And finally, I would like to welcome Alison King. Good morning, Alison. Alison is a principal landscape architect at LUC. Her recent work includes schemes for Kew at Wakehurst, the Royal Park, Peabody and the London boroughs of Hounslow and Camden. Alison is passionate about the critical role of landscape architecture in improving public health and well-being and reducing health inequality. We'll hear from all the speakers, then you'll have questions at the end. So please type your questions into the chat box. So to start off with, I'd first like to welcome Valerie Gladwell. Valerie, if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay,
thank you.
Can you see my screen? Okay,
yeah.
So brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me along today to talk about green space and workplace wellbeing, which, as Jane said, is one of my interests. So I work at the University of Essex. Well, normally I do, as you can tell, I'm in my own home, but normally I'm working at the University of Essex, which has got a lovely campus, which is seen in the middle here, and we have some lovely kind of different places we can go to the lake, or this is our business school, which I have several lectures in. But my interest is, as I said, is in workplace well-being. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about mainly about my research, but about other people's research in this area as well, to maybe just allow you to explain sometimes why green space is so important and the value of that for our well-being, and as Jane alluded to, particularly at this this challenging time. So I've put it in this place of workplace well-being. I do appreciate that a few of you are working at home at the moment, but I am hopeful that at some point we will all get back to our workspaces and be able to kind of enjoy that. So it's a challenge. Workplace well-being is a challenge. We know that working is really good for us. It's good for our well-being. Not only does it bring in money, but it also kind of helps us to have a purpose in life, and that can be really important. But it does come with the downsides, and it increases our stress levels. It does that leads to decreasing our mental well-being and can also lead to our decrease in physical health. What this leads to is a decrease in productivity. We tend to increase the amount of sick leave, but probably more importantly is we end up being at work when we're not maybe being quite so productive. So that's called presenteeism. So we've got absenteeism and presenteeism, and we've also got the increased risk of making mistakes. In some workplaces, that's maybe not a major issue, but obviously in some work that I was doing with NH hospitals, that is absolutely crucial. So how can we use the green space? Well, green space, and when I mean green space, that can include all sorts of different things, including waterways and lakes and things that can be classed as blue space as well, but I'm kind of encompassing it all kind of in the term green space. So it is very conducive to improvements in our well-being. That's well researched, and we've survived and thrived in nature until very recently. In terms of urbanization, that's only been really recent in the evolution of humans. So actually we have a very innate kind of link to nature, and that means that it can increase our well-being. There are obviously some dangers in nature as well, but I'm not going to allude to many of those today. What it does tend to do in most individuals, so I'm kind of talking about most people, there are some people who this doesn't work for, but in most people, it does evoke a positive response. Research has shown that it reduces our stress levels, it restores our levels of attention for concentration, and it reduces our blood pressure and boosts our immune function. So that sounds like it's a very positive and powerful resource. Well-being can kind of, in a very simple way, can be kind of hung on 5 things. And well-being can fit around being active. So it's really important to be active, and that's particularly important for our physical health in terms of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. We know that being physically active is really important. It also is connection. Being connected to other people is really important. It is important to give, so volunteering and things also help. By keeping learning and kind of stretching ourselves also is good for our well-being, and also taking notice. So how does nature all fit into that? Well, nature, and I'm sure all of you on the webinar today can appreciate that actually with nature and with green spaces, you can cover most of those things, because actually we know that actually if you're in a more natural environment, one of the experiments we did, people actually talk more, they actually engage more, so that connection is there. In terms of taking notice, you know, just looking at this picture and taking notice of the shape of the leaves, or the light, or the way that the trees and the branches curve, that's taking notice. And we know that just taking that time to take notice is really powerful. One of the early things I did in lockdown was put up some bird feeders, and I love just watching the birds in the garden. Obviously that slightly distracted me from my work, but actually I think I was just as productive by doing that. So work that we've done at the University of Essex has kind of encompassed that importance of physical activity and the green space together. And we coined this term back in 2003, and it's green exercise, where you kind of put the two together. And that's really combining the benefits of physical activity, the exposure to nature, and actually there's a synergistic effect of combining those things together. How does that work? Well, potentially in 2 ways. One is that nature, exposure to, exercising in kind of spaces that are green. So this is my local cricket ground. Then obviously I'm exposed to nature, and that's the combination of those 2 things. So actually I'm getting nature incidentally rather than actually going to seek it out. But also, if we just happen to be passing through nature, it changes our behaviors. So one of the examples I tend to give about this is if we put chairs in a room. So if you're all in my webinar now and we all put chairs across the room, you'd probably all sit down in it. If I didn't have chairs in the room, you'd all have to stand. So by changing what the environment is, it changes our behavior and shapes our behavior. So we need to think about that when potentially designing those green spaces. What is it that we're actually looking for? Is it that we're looking for them to gain nature by taking part in exercise, or are we kind of trying to change their behaviors by being in that natural environment? So some of the research that that we've done here at the University of Essex, one of the key kind of interesting things was that kind of in that first 5 minutes where you go and seek nature, that it actually boosts your mood and self-esteem. So actually it doesn't take very long to get a benefit. And actually when they did a kind of a gathered loads and loads of different data from different places, from studies that they'd done, they basically found that there was no necessary extra benefit from spending more time in that space in this particular study. Since then, there's been some other people that said, you know, if you want to get the physical activity effects and the green effects, you do need to do up to the 30 minutes. Another experiment we did was we got people to do, we got them to watch just a video because we wanted to control the conditions. So it was a video of a natural environment or a video of more built environments. And what we found that when we gave them a stressor after they'd watched these videos on 2 different occasions, that when they'd watched the nature video, that when they did the stress test, both physiologically and mentally, they didn't seem to get as stressed. Not necessarily the performance increased, but their physiology told us that they weren't getting quite so stressed. And we could watch what was going on. So we definitely know that things were happening, because when we showed them particular images, we could see blood pressure really dropping in particular images. Another experiment we did was we got people to walk either around a built environment or a green environment just around the University of Essex. And we then looked to see what their sleep was afterwards. And we were measuring what was going on in terms of their control of their heart. And we basically could determine from this that their quality of sleep seemed to improve if they'd walked around the green walk compared to if they'd walked around the blue walk. And then probably from that, one of the benefits might be that they were getting outside during daylight, and that helped. And we know that actually, if we don't spend time outside, it alters what we call the circadian rhythm, and we kind of end up not fluctuating. Normally we fluctuate in lots and lots of different things that are going on in terms of our body, in terms of our hormones, and we need that daylight to kind of stimulate that. And so getting outside into green space particularly can really facilitate that. The other thing that we found is in another study that those who visited green spaces were more likely to meet their physical activity levels recommended by the government, which is 150 minutes in a week. And people who went more than 3 times to the park, they ended up being about 5 times more likely to meet the government guidelines. The other thing, when we did another study, which I'll talk about in a minute, improved performance in terms of work and also work engagement. So what can we do? Well, one of the things we wanted to see was, you know, what happened about lunchtime? Are people actually using lunchtime or breaks during the day to actually facilitate this and get outside? And actually less than 48% of people would take 48% of people took less than 30 minutes for lunch. So more than half the population are not really taking what we'd class as an adequate lunch break that's actually legally required. So most people felt in this national survey, it was done a few years ago, but that they reported that green space around the work was there. It seemed to be fair or better quality, but only about 10% of people actually went out and did anything in their spaces around work. So potentially it's an asset that's there, but it's not being used. So we did a quick study to explore this. It was actually done Bristol and Chelmsford, and it was a walking program where we got them to walk for 8 weeks, and either in a nature environment or a built environment. We had prescribed routes that they were meant to walk. For those that went for the nature walks, they decreased their blood pressure, they decreased their perceived stress, and they increased their mental health. It also seemed to increase the adherence. Those people who were in the green group actually kept doing it, whereas the people who were in the built group weren't as interested in it. Maybe it's because it feels easier, maybe because there's also that bit of being able to take notice and just taking some time and some calm. But there were quite a few barriers into when we were doing this, which included obviously the normal one, which was time. It did seem to be better if your line manager was engaged with the process. But the other thing was just, you know, paths becoming not walkable, dogs causing problems. That's quite a highly cited one around dog feces, can be quite off-putting for quite a lot of people. So kind of how can we use green spaces at work? Maybe consider the barriers of why people are not getting involved. You know, it needs to fit into a work day. So what's that opportunity? It can't be too far away, otherwise people won't do it. The perception of what's out there. So when I've just done a straw poll of people around my campus, there's a lot of people who don't, you just saw the picture right at the beginning. It's extensive, our green space. And yet there's a lot of people that don't know what's at the far end of campus. They've never walked there. And yet it only takes 5 to 10 minutes to get there. It might be that people don't understand what their capabilities are. And they need to kind of understand that. And also the other thing is about motivation. The advantage of using kind of green space around work is that there's a whole community that maybe you can pull together and use what we call social norming, that actually it's normal to go out. So remember I mentioned the line manager, you know, if the line manager was involved, it was more likely that his the people under him or her actually went out and did the exercise. So we want sustained behavior change. So what can we do? Well, this is actually a diagram from Sport England about active design. I'm sure most of you will have seen this, but it's about awareness, the amenity and accessibility. So how do we translate it? Well, it needs to be of high quality. Some of the work that we were doing for the NHS, they liked the walkable paths. And if it wasn't a walkable path or somewhere that they kind of didn't get muddy, it kind of seemed inaccessible. Obviously, it needs to be close by, but there also needs to be a place to be able to probably just sit and take notice and be, as well as kind of getting there and doing the physical activity of moving. The other thing is that signage, you know, where can they go? How long will it take them? Steps, distance. Obviously, with all of this, when I say walkable, we need to make sure that it's accessible for those with different disabilities as well. The other thing is that the work that we're just starting to do is looking at the biodiversity and how that links in as well, because we know that, you know, actually this might look pleasing, but we think that there's starting to be evidence that biodiversity really enhances that well-being as well. And then it's just those places to be able to connect and be together. So if you want more information, we have a website at our university around green exercise, or you can contact me on vglad@essex.ac.uk. So that's me. I'm hoping that you enjoyed that.
Thank you, Valerie. That was excellent. Thank you very much. And without any further ado, Luke, please, if you'd like to share your screen. So we have Luke Engleback next. And you'll need to unmute yourself, Luke. So if you unmute by going to the bottom of your screen in the bottom left-hand corner.
Got it.
Perfect. I can hear you now.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So my talk falls in two halves. There's a bit of rationale to begin with, and then some examples. To reduce preventable ill. Oh, this is going too quick. What's happened? Something has gone wrong. Sorry about that. Full screen. I pressed the wrong thing. Let me start again. So we have to address the causes of ill health. And for me, that means taking a step back and seeing our planet on its own in space, and Houston, we have a problem. We're right in the middle of a climate and biodiversity emergency, and is up to us to choose the future that we want to have. And landscape architects can play a major part in making that better. We've been spending Earth's capital instead of the interest of the assets that we have inherited. And on top of that, we've got 44% less providing for each person since 1961 because the population's doubled, but the land area that is producing food has not.
Luke, your screen isn't sharing.
Oh.
If you'd like to try and share it again. You go to the bottom, there's the green icon. That's it.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it now. If you would like to go into presentation mode or full screen.
Full screen, my apologies. There we go. Is that all right?
That's super, thank you.
Thank you. So we have 44% less land providing for each person, and this may well be eroded further with climate change and biodiversity loss. To feed all these people, we have to get food. And what is the real cost of cheap food? One of them is just destroying forests to produce either food directly or indirectly. We import 60% of our food in UK, and animal feed imports have doubled since 2003. This is important because COVID-19 is a consequence of habitat loss. In fact, 75% of the zoonotic pandemics, these are diseases which have switched from animals to humans, have originated in the destruction of ecosystems. So land use and how we make food and have agro-industrial practice really are drivers for this. Harming ecosystems affects human health in a variety of ways. There are direct health effects in terms of floods or heat waves. There are ecosystem-mediated health effects in terms of things like COVID, altered infectious disease, or decreased food yields, or effects on mental health. And then indirect, deferred, or displaced health effects in terms of loss of livelihood, population displacement, conflict, and so forth. The thing is that it's not just happening overseas, it's happening here as well. So complex natural infrastructure has been oversimplified. For example, between 1945 and 1977, half of the UK hedgerows were lost. That's about 477,000 kilometres of them, a massive loss in ecosystem infrastructure and networks. Damage of the planet damages human health. And there are a series of threats, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, nutrition, water use, or soil degradation. And of course, any of these may exacerbate the other. About a year ago, the United Nations Global Environmental Outlook was published, number sixth version. Healthy planet, healthy people. This is what's important. And we have the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which number 3 is good health and well-being. There are a number of goals, targets, and unique indicators. Currently, we're not on target to meet them. We've got 10 years to go. Back in 1986, the World Health Organization Ottawa Charter linked health with the settings of people's lives. And as we've heard in the previous talk, the evidence base is growing all the time. And these cover ecosystems, biodiversity, physical and mental health. And now it's looking into the microbiome that we may experience or augment by being in touch with nature. So the loss of biodiversity is a silent killer, and we've only got a few years to sort things out, and these are going to be really important. Natural capital is important, first written about by E.F. Schumacher in 1973 in Small is Beautiful. Natural capital is often monetized for comparison, but it doesn't have to be. There is intrinsic value too. Kate Raworth has done an interesting book about donut economics, where her donut of acceptable place for the economy lies between the 9 planetary boundaries, 3 of which have been exceeded already, another 3 are about to be exceeded, and then a series of social boundaries as well on the inside. And this is the donut, the safe working space for the economy. We need to change. Biodiversity underpins ecosystem services, which then underpin the economy. provisioning cultural, regulating and supporting services, and these have health impacts. So my view is that we need to assess the ecosystem service functionality of a given site. This may be quite a simple thing to do in terms of yes, no, or potential, so that we can start to target what things are happening. And then in terms of ecosystem services, if you see them in terms of bundles of services, these will vary according to land use. And you can see in this diagram here that natural ecosystems have most things happening. When you start to do intensive agriculture or intensive cities, they reduce, but a biophilic city starts to put back those ecosystem services. And I think this is what the landscape profession and putting it on the ground can actually do. Should also say that next year we begin a 10-year ecosystem restoration initiative for the United Nations, and we have 10 years left before we have to meet a 57% cut on carbon emissions based on 1990 in order to get to net zero carbon by 2050. This isn't going to be easy, and transformative change will be needed to achieve it. So we've got 10 years to sort out climate change, biodiversity loss, human health and well-being. They're all linked, and we have something to do, to say and to contribute towards helping towards these things. It will be a challenge, and maybe we are the next key workers. We need a whole systems approach. A landscape-led eco-urbanism places people environment first. We need to get beyond just sustainable. That's no longer good enough. We need to do restorative and regenerative design. It's living system design as opposed to technical system design, which is what we've been used to. There are cumulative effects of these actions that work out from the local towards the global, and this is important. The Landscape Institute has recently issued the Green Recovery document, which actually talked about taking a natural capital approach, investing in maintenance and renewal of existing places, higher standards for green space, looking at climate change and so forth. The solutions that we need have to happen at macro, meso, and micro scale, and whichever scale we're working at, we need to be aware of the scales or the other scales as well, so that we can link into them, whether it's linking up to macro and down to micro or whatever. This is a way of creating healthy places and healing nature. When we're looking at urban areas, we can look at the determinants of health. This is the well-used Barton and Grant diagram, seeing all these scales together. Work we did about 15 years ago in Ashford started to look at how you could recognize ecotones and culture, combining a historic landscape and redeveloping it so it can actually deal with low carbon energy, water and biodiversity, and do it through interconnected and multifunctional networks. Urban density can allow proximity to wildlife. This is the Greenwich Millennium Village, and a design I did for the Eco Park over 20 years ago. It's still going. It's one of the most biodiverse parks in London these days. But we don't just have to put the ecology in the park. It can be everywhere. This is a typical way of seeing it, where even the buildings are covered with something that's doing something for nature, whether it's on the roof or on the walls. Ecosystem services are essential infrastructure, and we need to start thinking about how we mass buildings and how we mass landscapes for these things to start to mesh and work together. About 20 years ago, looking at the Elephant and Castle in London, I'd read that 3 minutes in a green space lowered your stress levels sufficiently to improve your immune system. And so we looked at where should there be new parks within 3 minutes walk, and then how to connect those parks with safer, greener streets that linked all the public utilities and had safer new places to cross main roads. Using a taxonomy of functional components, each component delivers a series of ecosystem services. So do we do eco homes or eco street excellence? One is incredibly plain, but the houses are super eco-friendly. I'm not sure I want to live there. Air quality in urban heat island have become a really big issue, and the COVID lockdown earlier this year made it completely plain why we need to rethink this. Nitrous oxides, particle and noise pollution are really serious problems in urban areas. The particle pollution contains microplastics from road tires, but also heavy metals from brakes, tires and road paint, chromium, copper, zinc, nickel and lead. So even when the diesel and petrol cars have been phased out, we will still have those from braking, except there'll be more of them because electric cars are heavier than petrol-driven cars. Ultrafine particles are a real problem, and PM2.5s are so small they can enter the bloodstream and cause a problem. So we need to consider airflows. This was some modelling that we did on the West Way to see how things work, and poor air can drag down with turbulence and really cause a problem for people that live in the lee of these spaces. So in that particular instance, we were looking at trying to get better air mixing with a faster flowing air above the rooftops. It's called the urban boundary layer, and also to filter air at the lower level. In Paris, they have retrofitted a major arterial route by taking out 2 lanes of traffic and replacing them with greenery to separate vehicles from pedestrians and provide a filter. Curbside planting also can attenuate a very large amount of black carbon and a fair amount of PM2.5s, whether it is as a low hedge or planting or rain gardens. Green surface transport corridors also do the same thing. A lot of iron filings are coming off contact with rails. It also helps with reducing heating, dealing with surface water, and reducing noise. Healthier green streets in a variety of ways can be planned or retrofitted and really improve everyday experience for everybody. On another issue, we need to make space for water in the heart of places, whether it's using our parks, as this one in Paris deals with all the surface water from the surrounding area, or this housing area in Germany, one of many by Joachim Ebler Architektur, where the water that's running off the surface is used and recirculated as a major feature, not fenced. This is one of the problems in this country, where we tend to go for balancing ponds fenced off on the edge of developments, which you can't use and don't look very nice. Whereas in Stuttgart, they just incorporate them into the urban fabric. It seems to me a better, more efficient solution. We need to maximize green porous surfaces, and we need to reconnect with urban processes and the delight of water when it's happening, when it's moving. We could use vertical rain gardens if there isn't space for rain gardens on the street. We should also create opportunities for community activities in green spaces, whether it's growing food or just having an event. We need to green childhood and getting hands dirty. The Global Health Institute in Barcelona did a study to show that children brought up, regardless of economic circumstance, in greener as against grayer circumstances, had better working memory and better cognition. This is also when your microbiome is starting to embed between years 1 and 10. So this is a time to actually get your own health system up and running properly. We ought to have an edible urban landscape. This is something we did with Kevin McLeod some years ago. This is, for me, rather more interesting, is using an old factory to make a 1-acre urban farm in New York. We could also use rooftops for meadows and woodlands. This is an example of a hospital in Switzerland. Or use interior planting to clear indoor air pollutants to make life better. So health is important to equality and liberty. This was a sign in the post-industrial town of Nantes in France. Healthcare has become too medicalized, and we need to actually upstream it to urbanism using nature-based solutions. London's public green spaces were costed with natural capital accounting and were found to actually have saved £950 million in avoided costs to the NHS. And this is something which also should promote a reason for why we should green our cities. We're familiar with the 3 R's, but these are the 3 E's: environment, equality, and economy. The most important is environment, because it's the foundation of everything else. David Attenborough said recently, we are part of natural systems, and if we want to save ourselves, we have to save those natural systems. So why are we still building like this? This needs to change. We need to get people to come on board with greening our urban areas, our peri-urban areas, and getting our countryside to work better as well. We need to seize the day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke. I think you touched on some really important subject areas. That was a very full and rounded presentation. I think we all will benefit from your experience, particularly in the bigger picture of how green spaces play into our healthcare. So, Alison, I'd like to invite you to step up. Alison King, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, those two talks were absolutely bursting full of great stuff. And let me see if I share my screen with you. Hopefully that's come up. Hopefully this talk, yeah, so hopefully this will kind of follow on fairly neatly with the two previous presentations. Today, I want to talk about two sort of specific LUC projects, and in the context of this presentation title, which is Within Reach. So it's about the power of having quality green space on your doorstep, and how what a powerful link this is to potentially improving health equity. So as I say, Luke and Valerie have already done all the work for me in providing the background. So where's, oh, there we go. I don't really need to go through this, but only really to say that there's no dispute now on the links between green space and health. But there's also no dispute, unfortunately, that green space is unequally distributed, and there's too often correlation between neighbourhoods with high deprivation and not much green space or very poor quality green space. There's also no debate that we have a real crisis of health inequality. In the UK, I think this, I'd like to sort of say that this is an optimistic message, because I think green space has this special power to address health inequality, regardless of socioeconomic indicators. You might have seen this in previous talks, but I always put it in because I can't read it because the pictures are over it, but it's basically saying if you've got a bunch of people living around a green space, a good quality green space, and they're all different levels of socioeconomic indices on them, the people who are poorest there and worst off still do better than people. Basically, it's an equalizer without having to try to get into the intensely complicated how do we level out the playing field for people in terms of wealth and opportunity in the UK. Okay, so that's something for the politicians, but as landscape architects, we have some power on our fingertips for delivering green space on the doorsteps of people who are less well off. And at the same time, speaking back to what Luke was saying, the brilliant thing about this is that at the same time, we can increase biodiversity and all the stuff that does in terms of combating the climate crisis and the biodiversity collapse that we're threatened with. So that photograph is actually linked to the Glasgow project that I want to give you an update on. But there are two projects. One is in East London, in a park called Galleons Park. We worked with Peabody and Bowles and Wire to design a play space in an existing park, which is this. It's a small 5-hectare local park that was created around a lake, and a park was built in the 80s. So we sort of we have this mature or reasonably mature green environment, which had no play in it and was quite underused and was considered slightly threatening, had a bit of antisocial behaviour in it. And the play facilities, well, there weren't many around, and those that were sort of separated and fenced off and done in the sort of the KFC style, the kit fence carpet. So this was a fantastic opportunity to integrate the existing green space with the play. So Thamesmead is the little yellow, this is just to remind people that this area of London has quite high deprivation stats, and childhood obesity is higher there than in other parts of London and other parts of the UK. What we wanted to do is to make the whole landscape sort of playable, invite people in of all ages into this space, make it feel safe, make it their park. So, and I put this slide in really to show that interventions don't have to be massive. And if you make them very natural, then they can also be used by people of all ages and interpreted and played on in different ways. So you get that non-prescriptive play. So we had lots of engagement in the journey, and this is a plan to sort of say how we're trying to create different, use the topography, the existing topography and the existing mature trees to create different character areas, and with an emphasis on journeying, so that people could explore and move through, but also retain, you know, really capitalize and use all the calming, soothing, natural elements that were already there. It's already been explained beautifully by Valerie, the huge benefits of contact with nature and how important it is, as Luke said, to get that ingrained in the first 10 years of life. And just sighting things amongst mature trees is very powerful. This project, as I said, is a Peabody project, but they have about, I think it's, I can never remember if it's 205 or 110, but a lot of play spaces in their social housing across London. Not all of them are able to be in parks, but they're very keen to understand the impact of improvements to their play spaces on health and well-being. And we've developed a tool inside LUC that's a combination of qualitative and quantitative and observations. And so we've done a report for Peabody on this, and we were able to say that after the first year, there are higher levels of physical activity, higher frequency and increased duration of visits, higher variety of play, a variety of indicators that we have linked through all the evidence base that's out there to improved health and well-being. And we did that in this case, because there was no play space there before, we used a local comparator site and did a series of observations and questionnaires in the comparator site and in Galleon's play. And this is a powerful and important thing to do because we can prove to people who pay for things that it is, you know, on a more micro level, doing that green capital, saving the NHS money, and the benefits that these things are providing. And also quite a lot of fundraisers, and now this is partly funded by the Marathon Trust, and they require monitoring and evaluation of their schemes for a number of years. So Peabody have recently, our lovely client there has recently extended this project is monitoring for 2 further years. So I'll be really interested to see how the numbers hopefully go up over the years, and how more and more people in the community understand that this space is there and is available to them. I forgot to press go on my timer, so hopefully I've still got plenty of time. So this is the project in Glasgow, which is one of my favorite LUC projects. I've spoken about it before, but there's been a recent development, a big new element of it has just opened up, and I wanted to remind people what it is. So basically there's a pocket of land in Glasgow on the east of the city centre that was completely derelict and fenced off for many years, because it used to be a clay pit where they scraped. It was the steep sides of next to a backwater of a canal, of the canal system in Glasgow, and they scraped it out and used the clay from there to line the rest of the canal system, and then just fenced it off. So it became fantastically biodiverse, a kind of rich piece of green land, but it also acted as a massive barrier between sort of 4 or 5 discrete residential communities, all with sobering statistics in terms of deprivation and poor health. It also cut them off from the canal itself. So it cut them off from the water, cut them off from each other, and cut them off from the West End of Glasgow and the city centre. And there's this brilliant project. Here you can see a plan view, which is a bit more helpful. So the top of the hill is up here. This is a big estate, another big high-rise estate, another community here. Sorry, I can't remember all the names. Apologies to the Glaswegians listening. And then this is the backwater of the canal. This is where the clay was scooped from. And this is now, the first phase basically it was a big endeavour to get this project off the ground, and very much sort of community led to begin with. But we put in a public path down, a spine path down here, which at least connected this bridge here. Can you see my cursor? Yeah, great. So there's a bridge across here, and then you could walk through here, up the steep side, and it connected up to these communities here. So suddenly these people could get down here through a beautiful natural path. What's just happened now is that these bits have been put in. So these guys used to just be able to look at all this, but now there's a link in here, there's a bridge across here, and a bridge here, and all of this part has just been opened up and enables these other neighbourhoods to connect. As I said, there was a huge kind of 3-day charrette at the beginning of this process a few years back, which meant that the communities, because there was about 100 different organisations involved, were very much behind this. And this was the graphic that sort of came out of the charrette. You can see the different neighbourhoods of Firhill, Hamilton Hill and Woodside. And then that's the basin that I'm going to show you next, where the clay was taken out from, that they've turned into this lovely watery bit now with boardwalks. There's a community here as well, which now has access. So that was the nature reserve that was done in the first part, or not done, it was already there. It was just given, it was opened up so people could get into it. And that's the path along the southern side of the canal. But then the new part, so this, Duncan drew this on for me to tell me which bits had just been done. So what you're looking at here on the right is the link to the community here. And then in front of you, these boardwalks are running through all of this. But we've also just completed a bridge here, and the towpath here, pontoons here. The next part that still needs to be done is this link here, which is critical, because at the moment now, all these people can get into this, move around it, connect up and down, and then connect onto the path on this side. but they can't get into the city down here. But that's the next bit, and it will happen. It's just these things take time. So in this photograph, you can see all the high-rise residences up there, and how they can now get into this fabulous resource. That's looking through onto the other side. What did I want to say? Really, just to say again, this is an example on the meso level of connecting right on the doorstep of a fairly deprived community, and it's all accessible. And I guess the thing is that obviously COVID has done is it's made all of our worlds much smaller. We're all very, very keenly aware of what our very local surroundings are, but it's a very poignant reminder for the more able-bodied, lucky people out there that for a lot of people, the very local is all they have, either because they haven't got the money or the mental or physical health, or because they're elderly or for whatever other reason, to get far. So what is immediately around them is everything for them. And as the previous two speakers have so clearly shown, it's what's right. It's just those 3 minutes, those 5 minutes. It's what's right outside your home and what you can easily access every day that has the most power. So I just wanted to finish. I think I've got 2 slides here of some of the wonderful tweets that we've been getting on this. It's really only just opened in the last month or 6 weeks. This one says, people of Westercommon, this is your garden. The one on the right, someone's taken their child for a walk. This one saying, a joy to use with a mobility scooter, more to explore when energy permits. Again, my mum's recovering from various operations, and it's telling her that it's knowing that you can go slightly further each time and slowly build up, and just by going once you get the strength to go again and slightly further. And for all the people whose health is really poor, giving them the appetite to just explore a tiny bit further and get outside and have all the benefits that we know are there is a huge thing. And then a person on the right here, my new favorite thing. Again, that starts speaking to ownership, as do these two. Communities taking ownership, the communities are taking ownership. Someone's already done a lovely painting, or I don't know what medium that is, charcoal maybe, coloured crayons, I don't know. And the one on the right's got a lovely bit of engineering testing going on in the rain in Glasgow. People making it their own. I've put Duncan's name up here because he is the director in charge of that project up in Glasgow. So if anybody wants to get in touch with and know more about that project, you can contact Duncan, or you can also contact me about any of it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much. Just a very brief word. I think what you all have in common, which is really interesting, is the importance of evidence-based design, whether it's actually finding the evidence, using it, and how you use it to inform your design, and then evaluating the effectiveness of your design. And I think all of that is so important for us as professionals when we're competing for money. And when engineers and architects can say, I need to do this because if I don't, the building won't stand up. And I think it's really important that we have the evidence that it's a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. So we've got quite a few questions here, so we'll try and get through them quickly. So brief answers from you all would be fantastic. So to start with, Steve Morgan, this is one for all of you. So we'll start with Valerie perhaps first. Quick answers. We spoke about inequalities in access to green spaces. How do we level the playing field? Valerie.
Well, I think Alison showed that so well, is those small spaces and really making them accessible for all. So I think it's trying to, seek out just even small pockets, because it will make a difference to health and well-being.
Luke.
I think we need to green our streets more than they are already. Some streets are still grey, and if we can use those to link to green spaces, we extend the experience.
So the interconnectivity is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, put those ecosystem services back in the street, get people to have nature as an everyday experience.
Thank you. And Alison?
Yes, I think Luke's example of what they did at Elephant and Castle, or are doing there, is very important. I think there's a role for digital mapping and, you know, really sort of looking at the fine grain of a neighbourhood and really marking out where the nature gaps are and plugging them. Both of the examples I gave are spaces that were already there and had been there for decades. And it's amazing how many neglected or unwanted or pockets of derelict and unused land there are that we could use. But sometimes it's just all built, and sometimes then we need to just say, look, no, we have to put in a, you know, 0.5 hectare lump of trees and grass and benches here, because that is as important as the services under the ground.
Thanks, Alison. Valerie, I'd like to ask you a question. I don't know if you've done any research on this, but what type of green has the best health outcome? Because the research some years ago undertaken by Professor Roger Ulrich in relation to a healthcare setting, he suggested that a more natural landscape was better. Have you done any research on that particular aspect?
We haven't. We're just looking at the moment about the role of biodiversity and how that seems to be having more of a positive effect. So what we don't want to do is get too caught up that not having green space and almost making it a problem by saying, oh, it needs to have this, this and this. You know, we need to make sure that it is accessible and has, you know, is able to be done. But I think the evidence is pointing to that increase in biodiversity. The one thing I would say, though, is if people haven't experienced that green space in terms of going through their childhood, we are going to get to a point where they're not going to get those potential benefits because they're going to be disconnected. They're not going to have those kind of really important connections with it. And particularly we know that if people are more connected with to nature, they're more likely to get those benefits. So if they know more about it as well, then that helps. So they know the difference between bird species or plant species, and that seems to be dwindling. So, you know, I think it's about trying to kind of educate people as well about those spaces. And we're thinking that more biodiversity is important for both health and well-being, but I think also Luke's point in also helping with the other issues around climate change.
Yes, and Luke, I think you also brought in the comments that Sir David Attenborough made, and of course at our awards ceremony last year, he said that if we're going to protect nature, we have to love it, and to love it, we have to be in contact with it, didn't he? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we do. What I find interesting is in terms of health, we forget that we are each a walking ecosystem. And I interviewed Professor Alistair Woodward in Auckland a couple of years ago about his work, where he talked about encountering microbial old friends by coming in contact with nature, because as we have lived our more modern lives, the diversity of our own microbiome has decreased. And what we are finding now is that has a big impact on our health and even our mood and mental health. So what I'm reading now is that if you can bolster that, especially in the early years, and this is what Dr. Payam Dadvand had done in Barcelona, was looking at a big cohort of children to see how they got on, whether they were, regardless of economic status, doing better in green or grey. We're starting to see a whole new level of reasons for getting in touch or brushing past nature, in addition to the whole very important thing about exercise and relaxing. So it's actually even more important than we thought.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks. We're getting very close to the end. In fact, I think we've got a couple of minutes to wrap up. But there's a question that's appeared and subsequently disappeared. So I'll try and remember it, Alison, because I think this is one you might be able to answer. Is how do we make developers recognize the importance of green in their developments, and how do we sort of legislate perhaps to ensure that we include this green infrastructure in our project, so it's all interconnected? And do you think it's a policy thing? Do you think it's something that has to be legislated for?
Yeah, I am a big fan of forcing people's hands through legislation, but I think the co-benefits are so evident. I'm quite excited about the Environment Bill at the moment. And then how, as soon as that comes in, there will be a transition period, but that will require all developments to have a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain. Of course, it's possible for people to do that by doing an inaccessible green roof, for example, which wouldn't help the health and well-being aspects. So, but they're all important pieces of the puzzle. I mean, Section 106 and SIL does go some way to legislating the community benefit, but I think I would be a massive supporter of a single piece of legislation that just threaded these things together. And obviously there's legislation on play requirements, but they're all separated at the moment. And one of our jobs as in the landscape profession is to remind people of how well they work together, and put that, educate clients to understand that you get the benefits multiply. People are going to want to live there more. They're going to be happier. They're going to stay there longer. They're going to be healthier. You'll get your planning applications more smoothly. You just tie them all up. And present that as a powerfully well-written, thought through argument at the beginning of every project. I don't know if you can, that's what I'd say.
Right, well, I think that's a convenient place for us to stop. So I would just like to thank you, Dr. Valerie Gladwell, Luke Engleback, Alison King. Thank you so much for your contributions this morning. I think you've given us a lot of food and evidence, food for thought evidence for us to work on. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.